This is the Paul McGuire Report. My name is Paul McGuire. On today's program, I'm going to give you a prophetic intelligence report based on an analysis of current events across the globe from a perspective of the Bible, and specifically the perspective of Bible prophecy. In fact, I think I might call this program a Paul McGuire perspective, or Paul McGuire's perspective. I don't want to be sensationalistic, exploit people's emotions by using highly charged words. What I do want to do is give people a truthful analysis of what's going on, based from the most important perspective there is, which is the perspective of the Bible, a biblical perspective, an analysis based on a biblical worldview. So, we have been celebrating, our nation has celebrated July 4th, 1776. And that's a very, very important date in human history. And the reason it's a very, very important date in human history is because America was officially born on July 4th, 1776. But I think it is far beyond ironic. In fact, I think it is, let's say, providential. Providential not in the sense that God was behind it, but providential in the sense that God allowed it to give a message to his people throughout the centuries by comparing two important things that happened on July 4th, 1776. And I'm specifically referring to the fact that the Illuminati, which is not a mythological, it's not a fictional, it's not a conspiracy theory organization. Anybody who has done a minimum, anybody who's done 5% of legitimate historical research knows that the Illuminati is a factual, historical organization that was in existence and still is in existence. Now, whether or not the really high-level members of the Illuminati still go around calling themselves the Illuminati is secondary. Because, you see, we're dealing with the world's most elite and powerful people. I mean, they operate in secrecy. And the moment the term or the definition of their group, Illuminati, becomes irrelevant to them, they'll change it in a moment. So we have to be careful about not being hung up in superstition, when I suspect that at the very highest levels, the Illuminati has most likely morphed, and the really key players in the Illuminati probably don't even use the term. They've substituted it for a different term. But that does not change the fact that the Illuminati still exists. Whether it's changed names, that's secondary. It exists. And it existed in 1776. I remember when Troy Anderson and I were writing our book, The Babylon Code, where we delve into secret societies, occult secret societies, and the occultic code that was placed in Mystery Babylon, in ancient Babylon, at the Tower of Babel. And by the way, Babel means Babel, and the literal translation of the word Babel means gate of God, or gate of the gods. Now, why would it be named? Why would the Tower of Babel be named gate of the gods, or gate of God? It was named gate of the gods because it was understood by the creators, the builders, the architects of the Tower of Babel, primarily Nimrod, who was a builder of cities. It was understood by the occult elite or the Luciferian elite that controlled the world at that time through various secret societies, that the purpose of the Tower of Babel was not only to erect a tower that reached into the stars so that they could conduct, the people of Babylon could conduct their occultic Luciferian worship rituals on platforms on the top of the Tower of Babel that ascended into the heavens. And these were rituals that involved all kinds of things, including an incredible emphasis on the stars, the galaxy, the sun, the moon, the planets, the gravitational paths of these planets, etc., and the worship of beings, and then eventually the worship of Lucifer. And the physical structure of the Tower of Babel, which we've referred to before in the Babylon Code, is called a ziggurat. A ziggurat is a pyramidical shaped architectural structure. And what a lot of people don't realize is that the Tower of Babel is also a symbol for the Illuminati and secret occult societies from way back. Because a lot of people have this misunderstanding about the physical shape of the Tower of Babel. They visualize it, as I did for many years before I did research. I visualized the Tower of Babel as more of a structure that went up, but really was not a full pyramidical structure like an Egyptian pyramid. What I learned years ago after studying the physical shape of the Tower of Babel was that it was in the form of a ziggurat. It was a pyramidical shaped tower. And that is exactly why in ancient Egypt, under the Pharaoh God-King system, which is a term I coined for a system of kings who call themselves gods, or at least genetically superior, or they call themselves the elite, and they all often believe they're divine, and their occult means of controlling the masses is to use sorcery, which today we would call scientific mind control, to convince the masses that they're gods. So this entire God-King system began in ancient Babylon, was passed on to Egypt in the form of the Pharaoh God-King system, moved throughout Europe, moved into China, moved into South America, and exists now, except outwardly the very highest echelon of the elite do not publicly call themselves gods, but in fact they believe they're vastly genetically superior. They believe that they're the genetic descendants of the gods, and therefore secretly they believe they're god kings, but they call themselves the scientific elite that rule the world through a scientific dictatorship, or as Brzezinski said, the technotronic elite or technocratic elite, which rules the world through science and technology. That statement of ruling the world through science and technology is really an adaptation of the original Luciferian template of control established at Mystery Babylon, which is based on the fact the super elite must convince the masses that they're gods through sorcery, magic, and today we would use the word mind control and social engineering, etc., but same principle. And this was passed on, this secret knowledge was passed on through secret occult societies from empire to empire. So what happened at ancient Babylon, the world's first one world government, one world religion, and one world economic system, was replicated by ancient Egypt. Those pyramids, those giant pyramids in ancient Egypt were simply architectural adaptations of the Tower of Babel. They were ziggurats, they were pyramid-shaped. And they openly had a pharaoh that they worshipped as God, and that's what I call the Pharaoh God-King system. You see, you can convince the masses through scientific mind control, through sorcery, through magic, many, many ways, that you are a god, or you are genetically superior and godlike. So if you do that, then the masses, it's a key ingredient in enslaving the masses. The masses won't resist you. They will literally think everything they're doing is a joyous service because they're serving their God. They believe that the Pharaoh or the elite are the gods, and they're serving them with enthusiasm and passion, and there's no resistance and there's no rebellion. It's a perfect occultic control mechanism, which I call the Pharaoh God King system. Now, look at the back of the US dollar. The US dollar is packed with all kinds of occult imagery. I've talked about this many, many times. If you want to know what all the occult imagery is on the back of the dollar and the front of the dollar, and the occult imagery in the streets and layout of Washington, D.C., the occult symbol of the Capitol Dome, which is a womb-like architectural building that actually represents the womb of Semiramis, who was a goddess. And Semiramis, according to historical legends and writings, she was the wife of Nimrod, the founder of ancient Babylon. So what we have in a Judeo-Christian nation's capital, in the interior of our Capitol buildings, in the layout of the streets, primarily through Freemasonry and other occultic groups, we have an unending series of blatantly occult rituals, blatantly occult symbols and phrases. So even if we say that America was founded by the teachings of the Pilgrims and Puritans, which is true, it's also true to say there is a hybrid mixture of the founding of America, which I want to get to in a moment. So in the back of the US dollar, among the many occult symbols and signs, is a pyramid. That pyramid on the back of the US dollar is, listen carefully, the Tower of Babel. And the all-seeing eye of Horus, or the all-seeing eye of Lucifer, towards the top of it, points to the fact that the Tower of Babel, that the pyramids of ancient Egypt, were built for the purpose of Lucifer. So it's all about the worship of Lucifer instead of the worship of the biblical God. And then, in case there's any confusion or muddled thinking regarding the symbol, in the words Latin at the base of the pyramid, it says Novus Order Seclorum, which means new order of the ages or new world order. Very important to understand. Now, and the Masons, and then the Freemasons, they were builders, they were architects, and so they notice that the pyramid is unfinished. The capstone on top has not been placed, and the Masons or the Freemasons refer to this as the unfinished work. What they're talking about is that they believe that their work, or quote, the plan, must be completed. And the plan is to use the United States of America as a prime force to bring in the New World Order. Their vision was not to see the United States purely as the Constitution and the Bill of Rights portray the vision, which is a unique, sovereign, independent nation with tremendous liberties. Ultimately, the United States could possibly be the head of this New World Order, or at least a prime facilitator of the New World Order, which is true. There are two nations which are basically running, controlling, and implementing the New World Order on planet Earth today. And that is Great Britain and that is the United States. And of course, the United States, it comes from its mother nation, Great Britain, and unbeknownst to most Americans, Great Britain largely controls the majority of affairs in the United States of America. We are controlled secretly from Great Britain through secret societies, etc. Because our intelligence apparatus was formed in Great Britain, and then in 1913, with the passage of the Federal Reserve Act, our monetary supply, our money system, America's money system, the ability to print money, the ability to issue coins, the ability to set and lower and raise interest rates, the ability to set monetary policy, the ability to print money as needed, was all seized legally, by the way. I mean, illegally according to the Constitution, but legally according to the laws of our land, because our Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, were co-opted, and they put through similar legislation which called for a Federal Reserve Act that all the Republicans were ready to vote for and all the Democrats were ready to vote for, because they own, because of their vast wealth, both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. So the political party, you can't blame it on just one political party, because either one was set up to do it. And so in 1913, our Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act, which turned over our entire money system to a group of international bankers who didn't have their primary residence here in the United States of America. In fact, a substantial number of them were headquartered in Great Britain, which revealed the fact that it was Great Britain calling the shots, and it was Great Britain using what I consider their phenomenal intelligence and cleverness. Because you see, Great Britain never liked the fact that America had a revolution and declared itself independent from Great Britain. And they vowed to take it back. But they were very shrewd. They didn't take it back through, open military conflict. They took it back through economic strategy. And you have the Rothschild family, one of the wealthiest international banking families in the world. And the Rothschild family and their vast fortune, which nobody seems to know the real amount of money. By the way, as I write in my book, A Prophecy of the Future of America, 2016-2017, which, by the way, you need to read. Forget about the fact that I dated it with a limited date. That was a mistake on my part. It could be really 2016 to 2025. Because in that book, I explain how the Federal Reserve Act basically changed who controlled America. And then if you read my book, which you must read if you haven't got a copy, it's not a thick book. It's a very fast read. It's not complicated. It's simple, so anybody can understand it. Because the big game they play with the economic system is to make it like smoke and mirrors and so confusing that people turn away from it. But I explain it to you in a very simple way, because when I was first approached with economic theory at the University of Missouri, this was, decades ago, so we're talking probably 1979, okay? I attended my first economics classroom. Not classroom, it was a giant lecture hall with about 500 students. And I listened to my first presentation on economics. And guess what I got out of it? Basically zero. I didn't understand a thing. Okay? Because my mind was thinking about the primary question, which is, most people are superficial thinkers. They think inside the box. And they don't really care about learning. They just want a good grade. Well, that's not the way I work. So I thought for a foundation in the beginning of this economics class is that somebody would teach me what money really is. Why does money have power? Why do they use money? Is money real? Who invented money? Okay? Because that's the real truth that will set you free. And I heard everything but that. I mean, here we are, big professor, prestige professor, and he's teaching us all about money and the economic system. And he's not teaching us the very basics because he thinks we already know it. He knows we don't. He knows the average student in the classroom doesn't have a clue. Just like many of the people I debated when I was on the biggest shows on the Fox News Network, I would regularly debate economists. I would regularly debate the heads of economic publications, publishers, chief editors, from basically a who's who, Forbes magazine, and so many other economic, Wall Street Journal, economic journals. But as I listened to this class, I realized, even in the introduction, I felt like smoke and mirrors, like I didn't receive anything tangible. So being the kind of person that I am, I walked over to the professor, politely, respectfully, and I asked him 3 or 4 questions about what was the real nature of money. What was money? Because he told us everything but. Now, I know that he knew what I was talking about because I could see it in his eyes. He was no dummy. He knew that the economic system was a smoke and mirror system. It was a game that people agreed to play, but it was a game based on a complete mythology. He wouldn't have said an occult principle, but it is an occult principle. Because I'll explain why in a minute. But this is how we lost control over our nation and our freedoms and everything else. And even though we have many similarities, and even though we are really co-partners with Britain in so many ways, the elite of the world, for the most part, come from Great Britain and the Rothschild banking empire, because it's Rothschild who financed Rockefeller, etc. And what they did is they created this fake organization called the Federal Reserve, which has nothing to do with the federal government. It has nothing to do with the federal government any more than Federal Express, the postal delivery service, has anything to do with the United States Post Office. It's just federal to make it sell well. It really means that the Federal Reserve is a private international banking cartel where our entire money system is controlled by about 12 international banking families like Rockefeller, Rothschild, and a number of others. And our Congress passed it into law, and they, against the clear dictates of the Constitution, totally control money, our money supply, as they do on every other nation, basically, with few exceptions, on planet Earth. And what they did in Europe is they created the central banks, which would be the same as the Federal Reserve banks in the United States. The central banks are owned by the international bankers like Rothschild. The central banks control the economies of Paris, France, Germany, Italy, and all these other nations, okay? So it is no longer we the people of Great Britain, or we the people of France, or we the people of Italy, or we the people of Australia that control their money. It is the central banks, which you're talking about, the international banking families that control your money. And as Rothschild said, I don't care who owns the armies and what else he said. He said, whoever controls the money supply of a nation controls the nation. And so they were able to establish total control over the vast majority of the nations on planet Earth through a kind of economic takeover. Now, this is critical because now, when that occurred in 1913, America was no longer run by we the people. It was run by the international banking families, okay? And today, the international banking families could have been called then the globalist elite, and they certainly represent the globalist elite today. These are the richest, most powerful families, often genetically related, because they like to breed within their own family circle. And at the top, not all of them, okay, I'm not trying to make a lack of precise statement, but there is a certain percentage of them at the very, very top who are worshippers of Lucifer. Again, I want to say very clearly that I'm not making a blanket statement and saying everybody involved in the international banking system is a following of Lucifer. That would be rather ridiculous. But there is a certain percentage that are. So when you go to London, there are two cities of London. There's the City of London that the tourists and people go to visit, the London Bridge where the Queen lives and all that, and all the houses, the neighborhoods where the Beatles grew up and all that stuff. The place where, what's his name, the actor in the United States and his wife live in like a royal mansion very near the Queen's mansion. I forgot the guy's name. He's a big Academy Award winner, liberal politician in the United States. He was in that movie, The Men Who Stare at Goats, which I won't get into at the moment. Okay, so let's look at this. This is from the day the dollar died, and I'm tired of saying this. I'm not offering this to you because I'm trying to make money. Okay, I'm offering it to you because I'm trying to communicate. This will turn on all the light bulbs easily, and that's the key thing. So many of these books that deal with the Federal Reserve are so complicated that I made this simple. I made it accurate so anybody could read this in a quick read, and you will understand the secret mysteries of the Federal Reserve. Okay, so we have to understand that back when America was formed in 1776, July 4th, 1776, America was officially born as a nation. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights was signed into law, and we declared our independence from Great Britain, where the financial center of the world was located. And then, at the same time, July 4th, 1776, the occultic financial globalist elite organization called the Illuminati was born. Okay? So in a sense, at that same time in history, you have two different directions or pathways for the future of mankind. And I believe God allowed that to show it to people who are discerning. One road is the road of the Illuminati, where man tries to become God, man builds a new world order as a counterfeit of the kingdom of heaven, and the world is ruled by a one world religion, a one world economic system, and a one world government, eventually headed up by the Antichrist and the false prophet in the book of Revelation. What we're seeing today in the world, for the most part, is the unfolding of the plan of the Illuminati that officially began in 1776. America, which was created largely through the thinking of strong Bible-believing Christians, the Pilgrims and Puritans, created an entirely different vision than the Illuminati vision for the world. America believed that the people, we the people, should run our nation, not an elite, and we're guaranteed all these rights which are exclusive. Only America has these rights as their primary legal documents. There is no other nation on earth that has the legal documents of freedom based on God-given rights than America. There are many nations that are faking it. There are many quasi-global government groups that are pretending to offer the same freedoms that America has. But when you read the fine print of their contracts, which means their rights and the laws of the land, you see that if you read the fine print, they end up cheating you. I mean, literally, any fool who bothers to read it will figure out instantly that they're being cheated. But what the media does, controlled by the globalist elite in America and around the world, bombards people with constant chaos, sex, confusion, and everything else, so people can't concentrate, and they never make the fine print of these of the European Union's Declaration of Human Rights available to the common European person to read. Just like people are graduating from law schools, Ivy League law schools, high schools, everything else. Notice how often they now will refer to the Constitution, but they deliberately don't read you your fundamental rights and what the Constitution says. And it's not complicated. It could be put down in like 15 bullet points. But they don't want people to see what those bullet points are, because then people would think for themselves. Okay, so notice this, that I'm trying to find, I'm looking at the day the dollar died. By the way, every book, if you go to paulmcguire.us, that's paulmcguire.us, it's part of the celebration of the 2-year anniversary of this radio program, the Paul McGuire Report, going on air and going on the internet and reaching millions of people each year. We're celebrating our 2-year anniversary just for this radio program, the Paul McGuire Report. And as part of that celebration, we're offering you a vast majority of my books at a big 25% discount. So that's probably the cheapest you're ever going to be able to get those books, and some of them you just need to get like the day the dollar died. I don't push the day the dollar died that much. I know I mention it a lot, but I'm pushing it because it's 180 pages, and you'll understand the whole gig, and that's the important thing. Okay, so let's show you some key things, okay, about our monetary system. All right, and this is really important to understand. They have been pushing, you always hear Kissinger pushing the New World Financial Order. Okay, so I have a chapter called In the Day the Dollar Died. By the way, I got the idea for the title, The Day the Dollar Died, by a Canadian author who wrote a book that with a similar type of title many years ago, before I wrote mine. And I was a very young Christian. I didn't know nothing about economics, but I caught him on a Canadian television show. And even though I didn't know anything about economics, it was like the Holy Spirit just blasted what this Dr. Cameron, I think is what his name was, not the crazy mind control neuroscientist, Dr. Ewan Cameron. This was, I think his name was Paul Cameron, I think, who was a Christian, and it opened my eyes to this whole thing. So what they did is the globalist elite created a master plan for their new world financial order, okay? And the goal was to use, way back in 1913, I have a chapter entitled, How the Federal Reserve Took Our Money Away. And I'm going to read you that quote by Baron Nathan Mayer de Rothschild, who lived from 1777 to 1836. This is what Rothschild said way back then. I care not what puppet is placed on the throne of England to rule the empire. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply. So Rothschild was saying, if you control a nation or a world's money supply, you control the nation and the world. Okay? And he boasted of it. And notice that he says it with arrogance, but it happens to be true. I care not what puppet is placed on the throne of England to rule the empire. The globalist elite, for the most part, Trump is an exception. I'll ask you to guess or to try to figure out how many presidents before Donald Trump was elected Rothschild, if he was alive today, would say, at least privately, they are his puppets. They're not operating independently. They're not operating on behalf of we the people. They are under the total control of the globalist elite and their puppets. You figure out who they are. It'll take you about 5 seconds. You know who they are, okay? So, in 1910, Senator Nelson Aldrich left Hoboken, New Jersey, for a 1,000-mile trip in a luxurious private railroad car. This is from my book, The Dollar Guide, with some of the world's wealthiest men or their representatives, to a private retreat called Jekyll Island, or it was called Jekyll Island Hunt Club in Georgia. J.P. Morgan, the big banker, purchased the island for family retreats from the icy cold New York to the warmer climates of Georgia. As time went by, the super-rich began to build mansions on the island. The Jekyll Island Club building was used for family winter vacations and eventually was used for all kinds of wild partying. When I say wild partying, I'll leave it to your imagination to figure out what these international bankers with their unlimited money did when they had wild partying. I'll leave it for your imagination to figure out what was really going on. And I'm not asking you to be to delve in filth, but I don't need to explain it to you. You know, just take a look at what's going on in our world today. Well, it was going on then. When these guys did their wild partying, you can figure out the kinds of stuff that went on. Okay. And they would travel in these private railroad cars, sometimes, 3 or 4 cars, because railroad was the main way to go. And their railroad cars they traveled in would be these like luxurious palaces inside a railroad car. Private guards, there was like mansions on railroad tracks. So they met initially in 1910. A secret group of men met to create a plan for a central bank. Now, a central bank was the racket that they had going on in Europe. Central bank, see, I'm giving you definitions that anybody can understand. This is not what my economics professor at the University of Missouri gave me. He gave me smoke and mirror answers that are confusing. When I listen to the media, the financial media, it's all smoke and mirror answers, deliberately designed to not let you to see the truth. But you see, I'm explaining it to you in simple terms that anybody can understand. So I'm not going to define the term central bank the way all the smoke and mirrors mainstream media does or the academic institutions do. I'm going to tell you what a central bank is. A central bank is a bank that is totally owned and controlled by Rothschild, Rockefeller, and the international wealthiest banking families of the world. That's what a central bank is, okay? And what the central bank strategy is that they took control over all the national banks of all the independent nations around the world, Europe, New Zealand, Australia, all over the place. So what they did is, because the strategy was Rothschild's strategy, the person who controls the money supply controls the nation. They took control over all these nations by taking control of all the nation's money, by inserting their own central bank to control the individual national banks of all these nations. But they didn't get the United States trapped yet. So that's what this purpose was. So this meeting on Jekyll Island to create a central bank is just a fancy term for saying the richest men in the world, with their wild partying and their occult ceremonies, they didn't want to call it a central bank because it had a bad name in America. But they were going to call it something else, but what they were going to do, what they were plotting to do, was to take over the entire monetary supply of the United States, steal it from we the people, steal it from the American government, use the same mechanism of a central bank, but just call it by a different name so to keep Americans pacified. That's what it was all about. So you had people like the Warburgs, international banking family, Strong, Vanderlip. I think that Maurice Strong, the Canadian billionaire, radical environmentalist and occultist, I believe Maurice Strong comes from this same international banking family that was here on Jekyll Island. They disguised their work, I'm reading from the Daily Dollar Guide, they disguised their work as public service. And they claimed, these guys are such liars, and they always use the same lies. They claimed that if they established a central bank, it would be for the betterment of all the people in America. All the people in America would have a better life. That's the same exact lie they used to create the trade treaties in Europe and to create the European Union. That's the same exact lie Republicans and Democrats used when they created all the trade treaties, NAFTA, GATT, WTO, TPP, all the trade treaties. It's for the betterment of the American people. But in reality, in every single case, whether it was the European Union, America, the trade treaties, it robbed the people of those nations. It made them poor, it made them slaves, and it made the international bankers richer and richer and richer and richer and richer and richer! Exclamation point. Okay. So, listen to how evil these people. Now, the American people hated the bankers, the big bankers, because they knew that the big bankers secretly engineered what was called the Panic of 1907, which cost people their jobs, their savings, they lost their houses, but they became filthy rich. Okay? At the beginning of America, there was, by the founding fathers, who were men of integrity, they continued to fight against the establishment of a central bank. Thomas Jefferson did everything in his power to block the creation of a central bank, which he knew would ultimately take control of the nation from the American people and put it in the hands of powerful European banking families. Now, we have a traitor in our midst, this great founding father, Alexander Hamilton. Let's read about what Alexander Hamilton actually did. Alexander Hamilton, acting as an agent of the international bankers, attempted to create a central bank in a plot involving James Rothschild. It was defeated. So you have to understand that the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the European international banking families are working with some of our traitorous founding fathers. They've penetrated the Congress and the presidency and all kinds of institutions, the press, and they've got their Trojan horses coming into America right after the American Revolution of 1776. Let me read you what the Rothschild brothers of London said in 1863 about the monetary system in America. The few who understand the system will either be so interested in its profits or so dependent on its favors that there will be no opposition from that class. The great body of people, mentally incapable of comprehending the tremendous advantages, will bear its burden without complaint, and perhaps without even suspecting that the system is inimical to their interests, which means that this new financial system is like super dangerous to their personal interests. And that's from the Rothschild family. Now, notice this. This is why I constantly say this over and over again on the Paul McGuire Report. It is imperative that you get self-educated. It's imperative that you train your mind and seek out sources that are credible but independent. It is everything for your survival, for you to be used as God wants you to be used, for you to understand some basics. And if you do not understand the way the money system works, you will always, always be a slave and naive. Okay? Now, that you just heard from me. But notice how the Rothschilds said the exact same thing. They're counting on you being dumbed down and your friends and families being dumbed down. They count on it. So that's why they say the few who understand the system, which means not many Americans will be intelligent enough or educated enough to understand how the money system works. Okay? And then they begin by saying, but the few who do understand it will want to get in on its profits or sell out and be dependent upon its favors. And there will be no opposition from them. That's all the people that sold out in Washington, D.C. That's the swamp people, okay? Then Rothschild continues to say, the great body of people are the majority of people in America, and he meant Europe too. The great body of people mentally incapable of comprehending the tremendous advantages will bear its burden without complaint, and perhaps without even suspecting that the monetary system is an enemy to their own interests. You see, they believe, listen to the arrogance, and unfortunately they're right. This globalist elite believes that you and me and the people we know and the vast majority of Americans and Europeans, they truly believe that we are mentally incapable of comprehending. Now, he lies there. He says the tremendous advantages. Well, that's tongue-in-cheek, because he says right after that, they will bear its burden without complaint, which means Rothschild knows we're going to place a slave-like burden on the American people through the money system. We're going to make them our slaves. See, you go when you don't know the truth, you go into slavery, captivity. Any pastor who only teaches you the truth of salvation is a hireling. Truth of salvation is number one. No question about it. But you have to know the truth of reality. Okay? Otherwise, you're going to be a slave to the day you die, which is not the will of God if you read the Bible. Okay, so they're counting on us being mentally incapable or dumbed down from comprehending the way the money system works, and the fact that the money system is deliberately designed to destroy and enslave the average man and woman in America and Europe and other places of the world. Do you understand that? If you don't understand that, you need to, if you don't want to get my book, then listen to every free message I have in the Paul McGuire Report archives. But whatever you do, for crying out loud, I'm tired of seeing God's people go into slavery. I'm tired of seeing men and women whose businesses crash and burn because they didn't bother to understand the money system. Look. I got to say it hard and passionate. You are going to be a slave in this lifetime. Okay? You are going to slave in this lifetime. You can be a comfortable slave, but you're going to be a slave. If you do not understand the secret control mechanism deliberately put into the money system by the globalist elite. Okay? So you have a choice. Choice one is to continually walk around in a dumbed down state and be a slave, like that's 99.9% of all Christians. Tragic, huh? Or to educate yourself, and that requires you paying the price to educate yourself. And the truth shall set you free. And you will not be an economic slave in this lifetime if you learn the truth. Okay? Now, I can't tell you how passionate I feel about this, because I go to conferences where I speak. I get emails and stuff. So many of God's people, and I've had to deal with this in my own life, for crying out loud. And many of you have too. We were fully unaware at one time in our lives that the money system is a slave system. Once we understood that, we began to see the ramifications of how that would put us in slavery, our families in slavery, Christians in slavery, our children and grandchildren in slavery. Let me give you a case in point. Why do you think the globalist elite, the international bankers, the people who created the Federal Reserve System, why do you think that it is very hard for the middle class, upper middle class, or whatever? Why do you think it's very hard for any hard-working, entrepreneurial, middle class, upper middle class, or whatever? Let's say they create, a $200 million corporation or whatever, or $200 million. Let's say they create one that's worth $1 billion. It is very, very difficult for them, if next to impossible, to pass the wealth that they've earned onto their children and grandchildren and funnel that wealth into the causes they believe in. Because we have a monetary system which places a capital gains tax on property and other taxes when a family member dies. So it becomes impossible to pass on your true wealth to your children and grandchildren. That makes the middle class, upper middle class, and working class perpetually slaves, perpetually poor. I know a man who's a brilliant man, okay? He's a genius. He's a Christian. He owns a vast radio network. And he has to deliberately buy very expensive assets so that when the time comes and he goes home to be with the Lord, all of his wealth is not seized. And the empire that he built, that he uses for the preaching of the gospel, is not taken away. And this man is brilliant. But he has to, he recognizes he's dealing with a rigged system. Now, conversely, the globalist elite, the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, they have a very simple legal mechanism which allows them to retain their wealth and pass on their wealth to their sons and daughters and to the causes they believe in. They have the legal power and the money. This is why a legal organizational structure called the Foundation was developed. Notice that all the super billionaires and trillionaires have foundations. The Carnegie Foundation, after the steel billionaire. The Ford Foundation, after Henry Ford, the manufacturer of the automobile. On and on. You name some billionaire. Rockefeller Foundations all over the place. They create these foundations. That allows them, under the ruse of a foundation, to pass their money on to their children and grandchildren. It protects the government in terms of taxation from taking their billionaires' money, and they can continue to invest it in their causes. But you see, the average American, and even the average wealthy American, for the most part, does not have the avenue of a foundation available to them, or the money to pay for the lawyers to construct it, so they get their money confiscated. The other thing, the Rothschild family, Rockefellers, and the rest of these international banking families in England, is they created from Jekyll Island what was called the Federal Reserve System and the Federal Reserve Act, which, by the way, has nothing to do with the federal government. That's deceptive. The Federal Reserve was a private, and still is, a private and independent entity owned privately by international bankers from London and other foreign nations, and not the American people. The U.S. monetary system would now be controlled by a secret wealthy elite who would earn interest on the money they loaned to the American people, and it would control the nation's money system and credit. In other words, the Federal Reserve System would take the control of the monetary system of the United States out of the hands of the American people and place it under the control of powerful international bankers. Now, that is completely against the Constitution of the United States, where it says that we, the people, the Congress, the American government, meaning the people, have the right to issue coinage, print money, set monetary policy. Now you have it controlled by Rothschild and the international bankers, and they also pass laws saying that the U.S. government and the American people do not have the legal right to know who the controlling members are of the Federal Reserve. Our government and we the people don't have the right to know what their budgets are, what their plans are, what their accounting is. We don't have the right to know anything about them or the way they operate. They're completely autonomous. They operate outside of our laws, and they basically can do anything they want without any accountability. Yeah, that's exactly right. And on top of it, our government is not legally allowed to interfere. Yet they control our nation because they control the monetary system. And as it has been said by numerous intelligent members of our government and others, they scientifically and at their choosing artificially create inflation, depression, recession. They create the interest rates. They lower the interest rates. They completely manipulate the economic system for their benefit. Many have said they deliberately created the 1929 Great Depression. And the reason they did it is it crashed the entire American economic system. It bankrupted families. They lost their houses. People lost corporations, everything else. And then the international bankers came in and scooped up all the assets of the American people, all these corporations, for pennies on the dollar. So the 1929 Great Depression was a Great Depression for the hardworking middle class, working class, and people of America. But it was nothing more than a ruse to multiply the wealth of the international bankers, because they were then able to, because the entire economy crashed, they were able to buy anything, companies, assets, corporations, people's houses at pennies on the dollar. So their wealth skyrocketed in power and influence. Now, two of the members of the Federal Reserve System, first of all, you got to remember it's the Rothschild family that were there. And by the way, the Rothschild family, many of the members of the Rothschild family are known to be members of the Illuminati. They openly say so. If you read the Rothschild, it's one of the most prestigious economic magazines in the world. It's called The Economist. It's owned by the Rothschild family and Rothschild. And it continually prints on the very cover of this prestigious economic magazine occultic, Illuminati symbols and messages. So, for example, I think it was about 2 years ago, The Economist magazine featured a cover called Planet Trump, in which there were all these tarot cards, and one of the tarot cards had Donald Trump on it, and it was a cryptic, occultic message of how they were in control of the global economic system. And it had some very weird, ominous forebodings. That wasn't an accident. These people are involved in the occult at the highest levels. Again, I am absolutely not recommending you to watch Eyes Wide Open, because there's some semi-pornographic scenes in it which would be highly offensive. I watched it for the purpose of research, and I know some people may say, well, that's a flimsy excuse, but I have to watch certain things. And it was an essential part of the story. It's not, well, I won't get into it. It's graphic, let's put it that way. But within the graphicness, there was truth, you see, because there's this mansion that all the elite coming out of London go to, and they have a sexual orgy which is not X-rated, but it's highly objectionable, let's put it that way. But it's an accurate depiction by the director, Stanley Kubrick, of what really goes on in these occult secret societies. Because Kubrick used a bunch of his movies. He was in the inside of these occult secret societies, and he subtly interwove in his last number of movies the truth about these people and how they operate. So he gives you an inside look at an Illuminati ball, an orgy, and an occult ritual with priests, the very wealthy, and it's perverse, not just from the sexual standpoint, it's Luciferian. And that was Kubrick's point, is he wanted to show you the Luciferian nature of the wealthiest people of the world. And then, to make it very clear, he shot this entire scene in a castle-like estate owned by Rothschild. Now, he did other exposés. Mysteriously, Stanley Kubrick, one of the greatest directors there ever was, mysteriously he died, I think it was about 6 months after he finished the production of Eyes Wide Shut, starring Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. And he died about he did not complete the editing, and he was having a big war with the studio. The studio was demanding, I think, I don't know how many minutes, but it was a significant cut out of the film. I think it was somewhere between 30 minutes and 45 minutes, or maybe longer. And they demanded that he remove all that footage. Now, I haven't seen the film, the unedited version of the film, but from many accounts that I've read, it was that footage that the studio was demanding that Kubrick cut from the film that contained the most powerful and revealing exposés of the reality of these secret societies and how they operate. And Kubrick absolutely refused to take it out. And then he dies mysteriously. He dies mysteriously. Now, okay, so what you have to understand is that the Rothschild family and the international bankers, like people like Paul Warburg, remember the name the Warburg family. They're significant in the creation of the Federal Reserve. They're an international banking family. They're part of the globalist wealthy elite. And then it was Paul Warburg who deceived the American people from knowing who truly controlled the Federal Reserve by creating a, quote, regional reserve system, supposedly under the authority of the president. And again, this is from my book, The Day the Dollar Died. But this was all smoke and mirrors, because the Federal Reserve was totally placed under the control of the international bankers using their vast wealth, and they created regional Federal Reserve banks to make it look like it wasn't the globalist-controlled, tyrannical machine that it was, but that was just a facade. And the international bankers, or the globalist elite, who controlled the Federal Reserve, also happened to own all the mainstream media. That's why they're never exposed. And there's no, I mean, this is the biggest story, and one of the biggest stories in the history of America, but it's never exposed. And then I'll read you what David Rockefeller said in a quote in 1991. We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time magazines, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity during those years. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government, which will never again know war, but only peace and prosperity for the whole of authority. Okay. David Rockefeller is praising the mainstream media elite papers, okay? He's praising them for covering up the truth about what they were doing. Is that not the greatest authoritative accusation that these self-appointed pillars of journalistic integrity, the mainstream media, are indeed nothing more than fake news? Right here, the Rockefeller's very words is an indictment on the entire mainstream media, because the mainstream media he chooses to praise are the ones that are get all the awards for being, truthful journalists. But Rockefeller is thanking them for their covering up, because he's thanking them for not covering, reporting, and calling attention to the dark secret plans. So, this is a no-brainer. The mainstream media is in on it. They are not. They accuse people who tell the truth of being fake news. But reading Rockefeller's words, the mainstream media is fake news. Okay, so we read that, and this is from my book, The Day the Dollar Died. The creation of a central bank or a Federal Reserve System was directly against the Constitution of the United States, because the Federal Reserve would be a bank of issue. In the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 5, the U.S. Constitution states only Congress, that's we the people, has the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof. The constitutional system of checks and balances of power was established by Thomas Jefferson in the Constitution, which was now seized illegally by the Federal Reserve. The scheme of the Federal Reserve Act would be to make the United States people and its government in debt to the international bankers. As debtors to the international bankers, they would now be under the control of the international bankers. Okay, so this is it. This is it. The international bankers in 1913, under the direction of Rockefeller, Rothschild, and Warburgs and others, they illegally seized control of our monetary system, which was in direct violation of the Constitution of the United States. It was the sacred duty of the President of the United States, the Congress, the Supreme Court, and every elected official. It was the supreme duty. They swore an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. And the vast majority of those men and women who swore an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America sold out, betrayed us, functioned as traitors, and I'm not a constitutional attorney, but I would suspect they violated the law and handed us, we the people, and our constitutional right to govern ourselves, by the way, given to us by God. They handed over the total control of the money system, which meant, according to Rothschild, the total control of this nation and its people. They handed it over because they were bought and sold men. Think about that. Now, America is different, despite that historical action. Because in the beginning of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, it says, the Creator, meaning the Creator God, capital C, the biblical God of the universe, the Creator, or God, has given us certain inalienable rights such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's a foundational statement. Therefore, all of our rights as citizens in the United States of America that are written about in our Constitution, it clearly declares, comes from God, the Creator, and not from man or any man-made institution. Therefore, since God, the Creator, has given us certain inalienable rights means these are rights that are given to us directly by the God of the Bible. And as such, no man, no human organization has the right to steal them from us because they're given to us from God. That's a powerful statement. There is no other legal document governing any other nation on planet Earth that uses that language. If you compare the way they worded the UN Declaration of Universal Human Rights and the United Nations Declaration of Universal Human Rights, which are very similar documents, you will see that there is no statement equivalent to God gave you your rights, and we, the European Union and our commissions, etc., do not have the right to take from you any of your rights that the God of the universe has given you. You see, their Declaration of Human Rights, which is the equivalent of the Constitution, is based on man's laws, man's decisions, not God's. They reject the reality of God. They put man in the place of God. So basically the UN Constitution and the European Union Constitution, and I want those of you all over Europe and Australia and other parts of the world to hear this. You need to hear it. You need to spread it among your population, because Americans are being dumbed down, and I don't mean this unkindly or with arrogance, but you're 15 years ahead of us. Well, we're catching up. The day will come, unless God intervenes, that we will be as dumbed down as the population of your nation. Now, the population of your nation is dumbed down, not because we're intellectually superior. We're not intellectually superior. It's just the globalist program began earlier in Europe than it did in the United States. So, your Constitution, your Universal Declaration of Human Rights, whether either the UN's or the European Union, is not worth the piece of paper it's written on, because at any moment, since it's a humanist-based document, any human committee in the EU, any human being, any group of politicians in the EU can meet, change, alter, remove, and take away any or all of your rights, or impose severe restrictions to your freedoms. Not only that, there is no integrity in your documents. Because I've read line by line the documents for the European Union and the UN, and it promises you things like free speech. Let's just take free speech. It promises you a lot of freedoms, okay? Wow, it sounds just like America, except that your politicians don't have to abide by your Constitution, because they can change their minds whether you like it or not. Number two is, when you go down, everything is divided up into lines, and as you read further down into both the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights and the European Union's Declaration of Human Rights, I'm paraphrasing now, but you see very, very disturbing legal language, which essentially says if you openly complain or criticize the policies, the ideology, the philosophy, the belief system, the leaders of the European Union or of the United Nations, if you say negative words, criticism, or simply express your right to free speech, even privately to a friend, or if you put it up on a blog site or circulate a paper or say it in a speech, you then, according to both documents, the European Union Constitution, the Declaration of Human Rights, and the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it says in both of those documents that if you disagree or criticize to a friend or media or speak out against anything to do with the EU or the United Nations, you can be fined retroactively. That means they can seize all your money from the beginning of your life till now. They can imprison you retroactively. They can throw you in jail forever. They can seize all your assets. And they can take away every ounce of your freedom and throw you in jail and seize all your money. Now let me ask you a question. How is that even remotely freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of press? It's not. It's a complete contradiction. You only have freedom to the degree that you say yes to everything they do and believe. If you exercise your freedom of speech, you can be jailed and all your assets can be seized. That is not only hypocrisy, that's deviousness. And they're counting on the fact, just like they count on the fact with Americans, that the Europeans and the globalists, the servants of the globalists, are too dumbed down to pay attention to all the language. So look, let me break it to you the hard way. Your so-called freedoms that exist in the UN, exist by the globalists, exists in the European Union, came out of the French Revolution, which was all based on human rights and human understanding. And that's why it ended up in a bloodbath where thousands of people were guillotined for defying the revolution. And the entire society went down in anarchy and perversion and revolution. Your philosophical flow stems from the French Revolution. So, I was standing at the place in Paris. It was very interesting. When you know occultic symbols, I was down in the center of Paris, looking at the streets, the way the streets were constructed. I was looking at the ancient monuments of history, the contemporary things they built. And there was one particular area, which a guy that was with me, who knew a lot about history, was explaining to me. And the area that I stood upon, I photographed it, was the exact area where they had erected thousands and thousands of guillotines during the French Revolution, and they beheaded thousands and thousands of people, and their bloody heads rolled across the ground, on the very ground I was standing on. But what I happened to notice was in this very place of the guillotine, where they beheaded masses, I don't know, tens of thousands of people during the French Revolution, I happened to notice, following a straight line, I saw pyramid symbols, okay, the all-seeing eye pyramid symbols on the back of the US dollar, Illuminati symbols, and I saw other Illuminati symbols. And the thought went through my mind that this was that the guillotines in the French Revolution was a blood sacrifice to Lucifer offered up by the real architects of the French Revolution. So, let me simply say this. Those of you in France and Europe and other nations that are counting on a UN or European Union constitution to protect you, you are literally standing on a platform just like your ancestors did before they were guillotined, and the rope of a guillotine is around your neck, and all they have to do is press that button and the door beneath, which causes you to just hang and snaps your neck, is ready to be pushed, except you can't see it. But it's a time bomb waiting to happen. We in the United States are, despite our constitutional protections, are not much safer than you are, because we have enemies of the Constitution who are destroying our documents by using words like it's an evolving document and all the rest of this nonsense. Okay, so this is the battleground for humanity right here. This is the battleground for humanity right here. Now, I want to read you something, because knowledge is power. Ignorance is slavery. Okay, you're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. By the way, visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. You need to get it today. Don't procrastinate. All the books I have up there that I've written have a 25% discount. Okay? If you want to buy cases of books, no, I can't make this complicated. They're discounted enough. I'm not trying to withhold something from you, but it'll turn into a shipping and accounting nightmare. You need to distribute this book and give it to people. Okay? Get The Day the Dollar Died. Get Conquering the Matrix. Get Mass Awakening. Get A Prophecy of the Future of America. Get yourself a copy, and that you would do through Amazon, a copy of Trumpocalypse and a copy of the Babylon Code. Become educated, okay? And pass this stuff far and wide. You know, it's amazing. The communists organize, they work together, they pass leaflets, they make their documents go viral all over the internet. They're working as one. And because they're working as one, they exponentially increase their power and influence. We covered this the other day. We as believers in Jesus Christ need to work as one. So go to paulmcguire.us. By the way, you can go to our brand new Roku channel with 100 hours of broadcast quality television of me teaching prophecy, analyzing current events through prophecy, Bible teaching. And the Roku channel is named Paul McGuire Ministries. We have the archives of the Paul McGuire Report, I don't know how many hours, tons of hours, massive amounts of hours on all kinds of subjects. We have all these conference videos you can watch for free, thousands of pages with great illustrations for free. Go to paulmcguire.us, that's paulmcguire.us. We are coming to the point of an escalation of the spiritual battle for the heart and soul of our nation. Anybody with eyes that can discern can see what's happening now. There's a momentum and an escalation in the emotion, in the rage and anger of large numbers of people. That is not happening spontaneously. That's being artificially generated. They want to create mass chaos for a reason. Because according to their own occultic dogma, which states order out of chaos, they intend to create their new world order out of chaos. So they want to create the new world order out of chaos. In order to do that, they're creating chaos in the United States. They're deliberately stirring up through strategic scientific mind control, cybernetic mind control using bots, algorithms, the internet, Facebook, social media, to spread negative, violent, emotional contagion, to spread mass hysteria of hatred against Trump. These are all the techniques of cybernetic revolutionaries that want to topple our constitutional government. There is the smell of fascism in the air. Do not underestimate it. Do not underestimate it. It can escalate. And at the same time, you must not react emotionally. You must not react with kind of an automatic response of anger and rage and some desire to get back. You must resist that temptation. If you give in to the emotion of wanting to get back, if you allow the anger of others directed towards you to form your emotional and behavioral response, then you have been sucked into the vortex of their matrix, which is what they plan, and they plan to use you as a force in their order out of chaos. In order to have chaos, you have to have, let's say, a conservative Christian constitutional force aroused and a Marxist anti-Trump force aroused. in order to create chaos or a conflict. If you enter into that conflict, you're simply accelerating the game plan of the globalist elite. You need to disengage yourself from anything coming at you in the media. You see, there's all of these messages, subconscious and conscious, news programs, incidents of violence that are being targeted towards Hispanics, African Americans, the LGBTQ community, evangelical Christians, conservatives, and they're using different platforms, different blog sites, but it's like they're sticking a hypodermic needle, multiple hypodermic needles of adrenaline. Okay, adrenaline created by images, sound, news stories, symbols, video news clips, and when you've got two opposing sides shot up with massive amounts of adrenaline, they go crazy, and they will inevitably clash with violence, which is exactly what the social engineers, the scientific dictatorship wants. That's what they want more than anything. So do not be seduced. Stand back from it. Take a deep breath. No, I'm not talking about getting into yoga or transcendental meditation. I'm saying take a deep breath. Disengage from the drama. The drama is a psychological illusion built on tidbits of reality. Disengage from the drama. If you are tempted to act, think, or say anything that comes out of your inner being, which has been charged by the negative energy subliminally and subconsciously implanted in you, you will simply further their agenda and accelerate your own demise. You understand that? Do not be seduced by the gravitational force of manipulated media images, sound bites, people like Michael Moore and all the others. What's his name? The fraudulent actor, Robert De Niro. Dear God, I used to respect Robert De Niro because I made the assumption that he had a brain. That was a big mistake, because I've watched his behavior. But the turning point with me was he was speaking live at some rally about 3 or 4 years ago, and he was giving his analysis on politics nationally and globally, etc. And I'm listening to this guy, and I thought, this is I thought he was he was an actor with integrity. And I'm listening to the ravings of an idiot who has no logic, no reason, irrational, and very little high vocabulary. And worse than that, his conclusions are not logical. They're not based on any solid understanding of history, economics, human behavior. It's just he's like acting like the character he played in Taxi Driver, when he had a shaved head and he was popping amphetamines and he was carrying Jodie Foster around in his taxi cab. I mean, he's older now, but it was like his real persona is not one of greatness, not one that he's a philosopher, not one that he's a great man. He is not a great man. You know why? Great men don't go on stage at the what are the big Broadway theater awards? Not the Emmys, the Tonys. And look, he was deliberately invited there by somebody high up at the Tonys to say exactly what he was going to say. So let's not play games. He just didn't show up there by surprise and attack President Trump. They knew he was going to do what he did. But they didn't want to do the dirty work, so they invited him to do it. It was prearranged, obviously. So he got up there, trying to look all macho and tough. And then he said something to the effect, we are no longer going to say, this is at the Tony Awards, we're no longer going to say, down with Trump, we're going to say, bleep Trump. Bleep Trump. And he actually said the words, it was curse words. And you know how they do the little visual over the mouth, and they cut the thing. Hey, that didn't catch them by surprise. Okay? See, what that does is that generates anger that spreads through the mass population virally. That's called emotional contagion. So he's a pawn, he's a puppet. But the worst part was, he's not in physical shape anymore. He gets up there and he raises not one fist, which is the sign of like armed revolution. He raises two fists in the air, kind of like a gorilla, and he's shouting something, but he's moving his two fists up in the air, way above his head. Now, that is a street body language for something to the effect of let's kind of like let's rumble, let's get down to it, let's throw this guy out by force, by muscle. Okay, let's engage in violence. That's what he was communicating. Now, who responsible ahead of a major network would allow that communication? Somebody who's part of the globalist elite wants to inject adrenaline in the left and the right, because if you can hyper create emotional contagion, you got people ready to go berserk on the left and people ready to go berserk on the right. And then they get the chaos they want, because the order is totalitarianism, martial law, police state, dictatorship, but they need an excuse. And the excuse is some kind of civil war. You understand the game? That's what's happening. So your job is to not engage, not allow yourself to be pulled into that. To think and say to yourself before you think anything, you begin the habitual process of thinking anything, before you act or send out an email or whatever, always ask yourself this question from a place of calmness, serenity, and prayer. Ask yourself the question: what I'm about to do, what I'm about to say, what I'm about to communicate, what action or speech I'm about to engage on, think it through and say to yourself, what is going to be the realistic result of what I am doing? Will it, in the long run, help me accomplish the goal that I really believe in? Or is it simply a short-term emotional discharge that offers you the counterfeit feeling of making progress, but in reality sows the seeds of your own destruction? I'm saying to you, you need to raise the level of your thinking and don't get pulled into this. You avoid being pulled into the riptide of insanity. Most often, the cheap shot, the angry words, the ugly symbols, the name calling, even when that response may be perfectly justified, the truly wise spiritual warrior, the spiritual warrior who wins the spiritual battle, understands that the battle is not emotional, it's not physical, ultimately it's spiritual, and the weapons of our warfare are not calling people curse words and getting down to their level. The weapons of our warfare are mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, prayer, fasting, and a word spoken under the anointing of the Holy Spirit does not have to be charged with anger, but a word spoken under the anointing of the Holy Spirit can strategically, like a smooth stone that David threw at the giant Goliath, drop him in a second. Okay? It's important to understand that. Otherwise, we're going to lose everything. Okay, so the members of the Federal Reserve. First of all, the Federal Reserve took over the entire banking system. And the international banking empires, these are the globalist elite that control the world today, or their descendants. J.P. Morgan, Eugene Meyer, Lazard Ferrers, J&W Seligman, Ladenburg, Thalman, Spare Brothers, M.M. Warburg, Kuhn, Loeb, Jacob Schiff, and the Rothschild brothers now controlled America. This is a year before the Federal Reserve Act. They also controlled the 1912 election of Woodrow Wilson, who was nothing more than a pawn for the international bankers. Now, the members of the Federal Reserve, when it was founded, here they are. These are the secret players of the international banking families. They're still around today, or their descendants are. The Rothschilds in London, these are all the secret members of the Federal Reserve. The Rothschilds in London, the Rothschilds out of Berlin, the Lazard brothers out of Paris, Israel Seif out of Italy, Kuhn Loeb out of Germany, the Warburgs out of Amsterdam, the Warburgs out of Hamburg, Lehman Brothers, New York, Goldman and Sachs, New York, the Rockefellers, New York. They controlled the global banking empire, and they still control the United States and Europe. Now, notice what people who thought out of the box, people who did not prostitute themselves, people who had integrity, politicians who had integrity said. We have so few of those, with the exception of Donald Trump, when the entire Republican establishment and Democratic establishment is after him. In fact, I heard today that certain presidential families in the Republican Party are his major enemy. Why? Because they work for the globalist elite, just like the Democrats. So you had the words of, in a contemporary sense, in a 2009 interview, Senator Ron Paul said, "The bankers control both the Republican and Democratic parties." In 1932, Congressman Louis T. McFadden, Republican, said, when the Federal Reserve Act was passed, the people of the United States did not perceive that a world banking system was being set up here, a superstate controlled by international bankers and industrialists acting together to enslave the world. This is not some conspiracy nut. This is the president of the First National Bank and chairman of the Committee on Banking and Currency. Okay, a high-level congressman. Every effort has been made to conceal its powers, but the truth is the Fed has usurped the government. So that means the international bankers own America, control America, not the government. If you want to know what the deep state is, if you want to know what the shadow government is, it's this. It's really simple. Your presidents, for the most part, Trump is not a puppet, but all the rest of them, they're puppets. They're controlled by strings. And behind the scenes, a shadow government, a globalist elite, and the deep state are running things. Who are the deep state? They're the international banking families. That's the deep state. And the question is, when you ask yourself about the integrity of an intelligence agency or any government agency or some corporate project or foreign policy or national policy, the question you always have to ask yourself regarding both political parties, are these elected or unelected representatives looking out for the interests of the American people and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, or are they sold out prostitutes for the international bankers? And you will discover that most of the problems that we're seeing right now have to do with a major battle for control of the United States of America. We have a massive, massive number of the highest level people in Washington, D.C. and media and many other areas which are secretly financed by and working for and are agents of the international wealthiest banking families, the globalist elite. That's what all the struggle, the battles, the legal things, the collusion, that's what it's all about. Okay, so we now read from Congressman Charles A. Lindbergh, Sr. I don't know if it was him who did that historic flight around the world, or his father, or what. Charles A. Lindbergh, Sr. said in 1913, From now on, depressions will be scientifically created. Lindbergh was saying that the Federal Reserve System would create a series of depressions and recessions and crisis in order to achieve ends. See, so all this blob from like people like Soros about the open society, a flat-out lie. There's nothing open about the man himself, or all these politicians in the Democratic Party and Republican Party talking about openness and trustworthy. Lindbergh continues commenting on the Federal Reserve Act. This new law will create inflation whenever the international bankers want inflation. They can unload stocks on people at high prices during the excitement and then bring on a panic and buy them back at low prices. That's what they did in 1929. The day of reckoning is only a few years removed. Actually, he was right on. He said that in 1913, and in 1929, what he warned about happened. They can unload stocks on people. They crashed the economic system, and the international bankers bought everything for pennies on the dollar during the Great Depression. Now listen to this. Woodrow Wilson, who was a pawn for the globalist elite, apparently he had a change of heart. Apparently his conscience became awake. That's a good thing. After he signed the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. Listen to what President Woodrow Wilson said. I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated in the hands of a few men. Growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men or the globalist elite. Wow. I mean, he said it. President Woodrow Wilson was like practically a Marxist president. He was the poster boy for the globalist elite. He passed forth so many of their agendas and laws, but thank God, God convicted him. God must have convicted his soul, because by saying this, he could have been killed. But he says it all. See, he's unlike most of our elected representatives, with the exception of Trump. That's why they hate Trump. It's so obvious. They hate Trump because Trump is speaking the truth. And Trump is trying to champion the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. He is not on the side of the globalist elite. He is opposing them. That's why every power on earth is coming against him. Listen to these words of Woodrow Wilson. This would be the equivalent of like a Bill Clinton or a Hillary Clinton or a Barack Obama coming out and having their consciences awakened, because Wilson was like such a pawn of the globalist elite. I'm going to read it again. After he signed the Federal Reserve Act in 1913, I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated in the hands of a few men. He meant the globalist elite, the international bankers. Growth of the nation, therefore, and all of our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the world's worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, we the people, but a government by the opinion and force of a small group of dominant men. Wow. And so what do these dominant men, these globalist elite, what institutions do they use to enslave us? They used the mainstream media, they used the Council on Foreign Relations, they used the Bilderberg Group, and countless other organizations. This is very sobering. It's very sobering. And it hasn't changed since 1913. The trade trees and the fact that, look all 5 presidents that came before the election of Donald Trump, both Republican and Democrat, you can name their names. I don't need to name them for you. You can count back and name all the presidents, all the 5 presidents going back 5 years before the election of Donald Trump. All of those 5 presidents, both Republican and Democrat, are totally sold out, bought and paid for boys that work for the globalist elite. Okay? Collectively, all of those presidents noticed that all of their policies created practically zero economic growth for decade after decade after decade after decade for America and the American people. Oh, you had one guy with like maybe plus 1%. You had Barack Obama, I think, with a negative 1%. Somebody else maybe with a 2% or a negative 2%. So, but what it comes out to is there's no real measurable economic growth under the policies of all 5 of these presidents preceding Donald Trump, because they're all owned and controlled by the international banking families and the globalist elite who don't want economic growth. The first year in office, Donald Trump, against every globalist force imaginable, manages to give America a 4% increase in economic growth. That's never happened before. He's managed to bring back manufacturing, bring back jobs, and that's with the media and the globalist elite fighting him tooth and nail. Okay, what does this mean? What does this mean? You need to become educated. When I talk to young communists or older communists or socialists and progressives, people who are committed to what they call the revolution, or sometimes they call it the movement, I've noticed that they're very educated people, not about everything, but I've noticed that they're readers, they read books, they're thinkers, they discuss things. I notice they use their intellects and their minds. Now, they come up with the wrong conclusion, but they use their intellects and minds. And they are completely dedicated to their movement. They knew from the beginning, when they started launching it in America back in the 1900s, they knew it could take 100 years or more to transform this nation into a Marxist state. And now they're very close to it. They had patience. I must tell you, and I don't believe this is the will of God, because it's not in the Bible that I read, and it's not in the Bible that you read. I contrast them with evangelical Christians, and even, sadly to say, many evangelical Christians who on many levels are sold out to Jesus. And sadly to say, not all, but many evangelical Christian leaders who are leading Christians in our nation, and absolutely, and I say this with no enjoyment, I say it with grief in my heart, the vast majority of evangelical pastors and their sermons, and there are many notable exceptions, okay, but I'm saying about 74% of them have totally co-opted. They've totally sold out. They're only interested in personal peace and prosperity, which are idols. Now, I contrast these and evangelical young people. It's tragic. There are, again, I meet incredible exceptions, but they're the minority. When I meet these revolutionaries and they are all well-read. They know philosophy, history, economics. They may have the wrong conclusion, but I'm not talking about an airhead millennial, and I'm not picking on anybody who's a millennial. You're the victim of scientific programming. But they're readers, they're thinkers, they're educated, okay? And when I meet the average Christian in all these realms that I just talked about, For the most part, again, there are many exceptions. The people that I meet who listen to the Paul McGuire Report are exceptions. You wouldn't be listening to me. Many of the people I meet at prophecy conferences are exceptions. But out there in Christian land, I would have to say that most evangelical Christians are not readers. They have chosen not to be thinkers. They're not self-educated. They have not studied. They don't know what's really happening in our nation or why it's happening. They're rather vacuous and empty-headed. If I was to put them in a debate, it would be a terrifying thing if I was to put a whole bunch of these Christians in some kind of debate room with a bunch of young, dedicated Marxists, etc. I'm not talking emotional millennials. I'm talking about people who read and think. The Christians would be correct in their testimony about Jesus Christ and the lordship of Jesus Christ, so I commend them for that. But when it comes to discussing how the Bible applies to economics, geopolitics, history, they would lose the argument because they are not educated. And this is the Achilles heel of Christianity in America. This is the thing that is prohibiting us from exercising the dominion and the rulership and ruling and reigning over our nation, not in a theocracy, but in the sense of obeying Jesus Christ's words that we must occupy until he comes, or to do kingdom business until he comes. In order to occupy the land until Jesus Christ comes, and to do kingdom business till he comes, in order to effectively evangelize, in order to bring in a last day soul harvest, in order to be salt and light, not only must we have a thorough knowledge of the Bible, Genesis to Revelation, and know how to apply a biblical worldview to economics, to geopolitics, to social systems, to sexuality, to marriage, to history, to philosophy, to competing philosophies like communism, Marxism, progressivism. We must become educated. And you're not going to be educated just sitting in a dumbed-down classroom. You're going to have to choose books, authors, speakers, and leaders who have paid the price, who you know are solid, committed, biblically balanced Christians. And you're going to have to select those people who can get you up to speed. And that means you're going to have to self-educate. You're going to have to learn how to read. Most of you who don't like to read, don't try to read. It doesn't take much. God will anoint. Let me tell you something. When you're faithful to God, he will anoint your mind, and you will understand things that you thought you never could understand. So I want to challenge you. We're in the greatest battle here in America in the history of mankind, spiritual battle. Same thing is occurring in the European Union, in the Asian nations, Australia, New Zealand, South America, in every state in America. There are powerful forces seeking to take down America. The only way that we can win is by seeking God, seeking his wisdom, and to become knowledgeable and educated. Not just for the sake of being educated. I know, look, this will probably get me in trouble. I've had the privilege of teaching as a professor of eschatology and Bible prophecy at major seminaries and universities in a variety of locations across the United States. There are some exceptions, and there are many Jesus-loving professors who teach the word, discipleship, and those things very, very well. But there is a lacking of connecting a biblical view with reality. And that's what we must do. If we're going to do, and this comes from, by the way, a flaw in theology, which we'll address later. So, if you love your neighbor as yourself, if you love your children as yourself, you need to respond to the call of God. And you need to understand that you're going to give an account. You're going to be accountable for your life, your gifts and talents before the Lord. We all will. I will too. So this is not to depress you. This is to exhort you. Because you will find that when you are busy about doing God's business, God gets busy about taking care of your business. So 1776 means a lot more than fireworks and hot dogs. 1776 is where a Christian nation was born, and the preaching of the gospel, the influence of the light of Jesus Christ nationally and locally, is absolutely contingent on America surviving as a free nation. If we lose the battle that is about to erupt between the forces of totalitarianism masquerading as free speech, if we lose to the totalitarian forces that are being financed secretly by the international banking elite, we will lose the chance we have for America to fulfill its prophetic destiny. Those are the stakes. So I ask you to join with me. I'm in this with everything I have. I'm in this with every DNA cell, every molecule of my being. I'm in this with the call of God in my life. I couldn't escape it, but I tried. And I'm asking you to join with me. I'm asking you to allow the Lord to speak to you by giving you a vision of what is coming, what has to be done, and strategic thinking. I'm asking the Lord to give that to you supernaturally, and I'm asking the Lord to speak to you. Many of you think, well, I don't see what you can do. And I just want to tell you, you're mistaken. You're one individual, but your participation, you have no idea what the participation of one individual can do when it's multiplied by thousands. So, I believe, our marching orders are before us. And so I want to exhort you as your brother in Christ that we have a job to do. And we can't fail to hear the call of the Lord at this moment. If somebody tells me I don't hear the call of the Lord at this moment, then I would suggest to you humbly and politely that you're not listening very well, because he is speaking to you, like he's speaking to you right now, like he's speaking to me right now. You are being called. You were called for such a time as this. And now that you're here, you're being called. So I ask you to join with me in this call. And again, the goal is to massively increase the level, the scope of our media outreach via television, via social media, via the internet, via radio, via books, via feature films, via conferences, and then training others, every means possible. And I must tell you that the last year, as we wrote Trumpocalypse, the spiritual warfare that has erupted is unprecedented. And the reason for that is, quite bluntly, I believe that the devil hates the message that we're giving out. So I'm asking you to seek the Lord. And first I want to thank all of you that have sought the Lord and have obeyed God by being true and faithful intercessory prayer warriors. I want to thank you. I want to thank those of you who have obeyed the call of God to use your wisdom and abilities with the internet and technology and spread this message far and wide and help us get around and do end runs around the censors. And then I want to thank those of you who have sought the Lord and who have obeyed God when God spoke to you and is speaking to you about how you can donate to Paul McGuire Ministries and Paradise Mountain Church, and that you're willing not to just, go through some autopilot thing, but I want to thank all of you that really asked the Lord what you could do and to show you how to think outside the box. And I want to thank you for the faithful contributions financially and donations from everyone who has given. A small amount, large amount, regularly, occasionally, because everybody's situation is different. And I treat all giving with the utmost respect and thankfulness. So together, you see, just like the enemy is using this, if we are one in the Spirit, which we should be, if we operate as one and we operate in unity, then as God illustrated the purpose in Genesis 11, nothing they purpose to do will be withheld from them. In other words, our plans that God has given us will be achievable by the power of God. God did not illustrate that lesson, which was then in Babylon employed for evil purposes. God was not saying that the principle was evil. He was simply saying that the principle can be used for evil or for good. If we employ that principle for good, we will be unstoppable. Unstoppable. And that's what God wants. Because before his return, God is love. Before his return, he's very serious about this. He wants a massive last days soul harvest, which means we first must have a biblical revival, and we must have a reformation in our thinking, how we think about the Bible, how we think about life. We must have our minds renewed by the Word of God. So join me. Go to paulmcguire.us, take advantage of all our free resources, take advantage of the 2-year anniversary special, and get your hands on books and educate yourself and pass the books around. And then also, as God leads you, send me an email or whatever, or a note telling me you're praying. That means a lot to me. Or just give me a quick word about how the Lord, you can be anonymous, or how the Lord told you to do this or that, and it successfully helped to spread the message. Or write us if you want to make a donation. You can do it electronically at paulmcguire.us. It's totally secure. Or you can do it by mail. In any case, we need to join together because we're all in this together, okay? And I believe with all my heart that this is a winnable war, okay? I believe with all my heart that this is a winnable war because with God all things are possible. So God bless you. This is your brother in Christ, Paul McGuire, and together we will fulfill the commandments of Jesus Christ to occupy the land until he comes and to do kingdom business until he comes. This is what 1776 is all about. God bless you, Paul McGuire.